It is 4 o'clock. And hello, Dr. Anderson. How are you?
I am well. Hi there, Mr. Fairfax.
So do you have anything you would like to address the group for first? Okay, no. All right. Well, I'm counting the names. Not everyone's here, but we do have a quorum, it looks like. So to be respectful of everyone's time, I would like to begin, and I will do that with a roll call to make sure we can see everyone. Dr. Anderson, I see you are here. Ms. Cohen, Laura Jane Cohen.
Hi, here.
Hi, Laura Jane. Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Good afternoon, Ms. Daranack Koufax.
Good afternoon, Ms. Corbett Sanders. Mr. Frisch.
Hello.
Hello, Carl. Ms. Keys Gamara. She hasn't joined us yet. Ms. McLaughlin. Oh, Ms. Keys Gamara, I just called you. You want to say hello?
Hello, everybody. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
I'm here. I'm here as well.
Ms. McLaughlin. All right, thank you. Ms. Marin.
Hi, good afternoon.
You are. Good afternoon. Ms. Omish.
Hello.
Hello. Ms. Pekarsky.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Ms. Sizemore Heiser.
I'm here. Good afternoon.
Hello, how are you? Ms. Tolan.
I'm here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And I don't see our student rep. I don't think he's Nathan. I don't think he's here today. Thank you all for coming. Today is our first work session on the FY22 Superintendent's Proposed Budget. Of course, Dr. Brabrand presented this budget to us and the public last Thursday night. It currently reflects a modest request that's focused on the basic strategic needs of our system. The FY22 budget provides almost level funding from the previous year, including some funding for key needs that echo school board stated priorities. This budget requests nearly $43 million in new funds from the county, primarily due to reductions in state, federal, and other revenue sources. This afternoon, Ms. Burden is going to give us a short recap of the superintendent's presentation, followed by discussion and questions. Dr. Brabrand and his leadership team members are here to respond to any questions you might have, and any questions that cannot be answered verbally at this work session can be submitted to Ms. Burden via email for a written response. The way we will run this session is pretty much the way we've been doing. 3 minutes for your first round of questions, 2 minutes for your second round of questions. And staff, we ask that you will try to limit your answers to 3 minutes, as we will be timing that. And Ms. Malberg, I will ask that you provide our time as you often do. So I will now turn this over to Ms. Burden to review.
Good evening or afternoon. Dr. Brabrand, did you want to make any introductory comments, or you want me to jump right in?
I'll make just a couple of very quick comments, Ms. Burden. Thank you. And I want to thank you, Ms. Burden, again, and your team for your leadership in helping develop this proposed budget that I presented to the board last week. Board members, 2021 has begun with good news, as you know, on the vaccination. And I'll be sharing additional communication to our staff today around tomorrow, around registration for that vaccination process. But we also received very good news this morning. I sat on a call with the state superintendent about information regarding the second stimulus package that was just passed by Congress. It's referred to as ESSER 2. And we learned that the distributions for each school district, including Fairfax County Public Schools, is coming to us. We learned that our share is $83 million in one-time money. Obviously, this afternoon, we do not have a plan for that money. This money is greater than what we expected, so it is very, very good news. The state has identified priorities around student learning loss and around infrastructure. We shared in our budget presentation last week when we looked at unfunded items, we had three main elements: compensation, learning loss, and infrastructure. So the state superintendent shared priorities that overlap with two of the three things that we talked about. We know that those areas all involved high amounts of dollars. So we need to be thoughtful, obviously, and this is only one-time money. But this is very welcome news. And in the weeks ahead, we'll be following up with updated plans. We'll be getting your feedback as well, which you may want to inform us on this afternoon. And we will do everything we can to align this additional money with budget priorities that the board has shared and the unfunded items around compensation, infrastructure, and student learning loss. So we look forward to additional discussions with you. And it's also important to know this new money, we have time through September of 2023. So we can be very thoughtful and collaborative around our use of the money as we look at FY22 and even beyond. So we look forward to the discussions today. And I know Ms. Burden wants to do a quick recap and we'll get right into your questions. Ms. Burden.
Yeah, basically, I'm just going to go over the 4 pages that provide, the substance of our increases, the required adjustments, the recurring adjustments, the identified investments, and then, of course, the revenue. The required adjustments are items that we believe there is no discretion in whether we will fund them. They're required. They reflect mandatory obligations for enrollment, employee benefits like health care and retirement rate increases, lease obligations for FCPS on, some contractual services for utility rates and maintenance and tech service contracts, and items that have been approved through quarterly adjustments that have recurring costs. The required adjustments also include a small transfer to the construction fund. Now, the required increases total $36.9 million, but they are offset by one-time funding resulting in decreases for centralized instructional resources and the CARES grant of $27.7 million. There are also routine compensation savings due to turnover from 21 to 22 of $21.3 million, so that ultimately the required adjustments represent a net decrease to the budget of $12.1 million. If you move on to the recurring adjustments, they represent items that were funded with placeholder funds included in the 21 approved budget. You may recall that these positions were established at fiscal 21 mid-year review, but they have to be established in fiscal 22 as well. The COVID-19 placeholder reserve and the technology infrastructure reserve are recurring dollars that total $11.3 million. And so to establish these positions as permanently in the 22 budget or the base budget, these dollars were repurposed from the placeholder funding for the T-specs, the SBITs, the psychologists, social workers, an equity position, and some other non-salary needs for digital resources and web conferencing and some enhanced cybersecurity. Therefore, the recurring adjustments don't represent any new money in the budget. The expenses and savings net to zero. These are just technical adjustments to reflect the allocation of those reserves. The last category of expenditure increases are identified investments, and they represent selected items that the superintendent identified as a need for fiscal 22. We did not conduct a new resources request process this year because it was known very early that new funding for fiscal 22 would be limited. A total of $12.5 million and 80 positions have been categorized as identified investments. These investments represent the collective budget themes identified by feedback from the school board on their priorities last fall, as well as consultation with the leadership team. The 6 investments include funding for 50 ESOL teachers, the final phase of the CIS salary scale enhancement, the first phase of the enhancements recommended for the advanced academic program, a special ed placeholder for that ongoing review, and a small amount of funds to establish the beginnings of a collective bargaining unit and to provide additional funds for legal services. And then the last chart that I'm going to go over to kick us off is the revenue. And you can see the county transfer request is an increase of $42.7 million. And that's to fund the things that I've mentioned, enrollment and student needs, funding for salary scale enhancements for classroom instructional support employees, employee benefit rate increases for retirement and health, and funding to maintain current services, as well as, and that is offsetting the declining revenue that we're seeing in the other three categories. Sales tax and state aid, state revenue is projected to decrease by $9.7 million, primarily because the FCPS allocation contained in the governor's introduced budget includes the state share's funding of a one-time 2% bonus, which we have chosen to forego due to the additional local budget impact, which is $31.6 million. As far as the federal money goes, this represents the reduction of funds that you saw in the expenditure side for the CARES grant that we got last March. Of course, we now know that we are going to receive additional federal funding in fiscal 22, but those funds aren't reflected here because we just found out last night. And, we'll be working on a plan for expenditures in the coming weeks. As far as the beginning balance and other funding, that's reduced by $12.6 million. Recall that some funds were set aside for food services. We also have the instructional resources that were included in the budget before that have been reduced, as you saw the reduction on the expenditure side as well. This just matches that. And then other revenue is expected to increase a little bit, and so that's offsetting that beginning balance reduction. And then if you just want to go to the executive summary, I said 4 charts, but actually it ends up being 5. This reflects the executive summary, or the revenue adjustments and the expenditure adjustments shown together. And the fiscal 22 budget reflects a modest proposal, almost level with funding from the current year, fiscal 21. It's a $400,000 increase in expenditures, but there is a $42.7 million increase in the county transfer to address the declining revenue in state, federal, and the beginning balance and other revenue sources. And before I think Tammy's going to jump back in, just know that if you have budget questions, feel free to send those to me at my email address. I'll make sure the appropriate people are CC'd. As far as the budget office, the school board office, you don't have to worry about that. And, identify a priority of 1, 2, or 3, depending on how quickly you need an answer. And we will, send them out to the appropriate people and get answers for you as quickly as possible. That's it.
Thank you, Lee, and Ms. Marin and Ms. Derenak Kofax. We're ready to take any questions that you all may have this afternoon.
Absolutely, and thank you, Dr. Brabrand, for that information about the $83 million. That is quite good news. So I look forward to discussing with my colleagues as well as you all what are the best avenue forward there. So I have 3 people with their hands up. We will start with Dr. Anderson, followed by Ms. Cohen.
Thank you. Just want to kind of pick up on the news of the day, which is that $83 million. Can you speak to the parameters around those funds as much as you know them at this time? What they cannot be spent on? I do realize that they're one-time funds, but I'd like to have some more specificity.
Ms. Burden, could you answer that? I believe a lot of it will overlay with what the fund use was for the CARES funding, with 2 additional areas around student learning loss, as well as infrastructure upgrades to support COVID-19 mitigation and other environmental hazards. But I'll let Ms. Burden add some additional detail.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Dr. Brabrand. The usage, the allowable usage is essentially the same as the CARES funding that we received in March, with the addition of those two areas for learning loss and infrastructure improvements.
And I'm so sorry, Ms. Burden, if you could just repeat what the allowable expenditures were for the original CARES fund, I would appreciate that.
Yes, I mean, it's PPE, technology, distance learning, intervention, remediation. I'm looking as fast as I can for my notes of the exact list. But it's basically, cleaning, additional custodial time. Those are the kinds of things that we funded that were allowable uses with the first amount of money.
Ms. Burden, I know one of the questions maybe Dr. Anderson may be getting at, and I know there was some discussion this morning at the state around use of the money for bonuses or for compensation. And I believe we're still analyzing the bill to understand the flexibility that we have around compensation. Is that right, Ms. Burden? Yes,
that's correct. They didn't give us an absolute no, but they didn't give us an absolute yes either. That's something that we're going to have to investigate. We're going to need to talk to the state and see, to get more information about that before we consider it.
Thank you. That's kind of exactly where I was leading to in a very long way. So thank you for making that a little bit shorter, Dr. Brabrand, because I know this is an area of concern where if we are returning funds to the state, any ways that we could have to capture that while providing some benefit to our employees would be desirable. Speaking of our employees and additional benefits to it, and I know we try very much to match what the county is doing. What ideas do you have, if any, regarding the county's plans for compensation increases for its employees?
So Chairman Anderson, I'd make two comments, and then Ms. Burden or Mr. Smith, who is also on the call, can add in. First of all, we are going to do everything we can to work with the state to have full flexibility for this new stimulus funding for whatever the board wants to prioritize. So we're going to bring you our best thing with the complete ultimate flexibility that we can have with these funds, obviously following federal and state laws. Other is we, continue to dialogue.
Dr. Brabrand, I don't know if it's me, but you're breaking up just a little bit.
Oh, okay. I apologize. Let me take my video off and see if that helps. The other thing, we talked with the county executive. There is no understanding at this time that compensation is on the table. Of course, we shared our budget with the county executive, but we don't have an understanding that compensation is on the table with the county. That being said, we will wait for the county executive to release his budget in February. I know he certainly, if he had the funding, would want to support his employees, and we talked about wanting to support our employees during these tough times. I think it's going to be a function of the revenue growth of the county, which we shared with you last week, was only projected at 0.5%. But we'll continue to dialogue with them. I think it's important to remember this one-time money, even if we can use it to salary, we would work closely with the county to be willing to support us in backfilling that amount next year if we look at salary in terms of step increase, for example, other than a bonus, because we would be required to have that additional expense every year. So there's more to come on that. Again, this just broke hours ago, late last night, and then first thing this morning, the meeting with the state superintendent, and we'll know more in the days ahead, and we'll bring you updates.
Thank you. I'm having a little bit of an issue hearing you, but I'm going to just continue. One of the things that I think would be key is, as we've talked about what this year has meant for our students, we've had a lot of students who have had their gaps be increased or even created through our online learning platform. The learning loss in terms of what we're able to do to address that has to be priority one. And I hope that my colleagues will join me in making that our priority, because I can't find the page, but I know it's one of the unfunded measures here that you presented to us last week. I think it's slide 13 for the extended learning opportunities. I would look for that to be the first thing we try to address in a very robust manner with these additional funds. I also want to ask, what possibility would there be to use these one-time funds to replenish our beginning balance that we drew down on earlier this year?
I will defer to the second question, but on the first question, and Dr. Presidio is with us today, his team is in the middle of finalizing an extensive multi-pronged approach around student learning loss. So we will be bringing this board information around that issue very soon. And we're certainly going to be looking at these dollars to support those plans, and we'll bring you more information very soon. On the second item, I defer to Ms. Burden.
A revenue loss backfill is not an allowable use.
Okay. Thank you for that. My other question, again, I had these questions created before we got this information, but still I think it's worthwhile to ask. In reviewing the slides that spoke to contracts and leases, particularly those that are addressing space, we're in an environment where many of our employees have teleworked. What plans do we have in terms of continuing that for some of our employees, at least on a partial basis, so that we could reduce our dependency on leases, therefore reducing our cost in that area? Where do we see some savings in this?
I believe that is an issue that Mr. Plattenberg has been looking at. I don't know if he has any details that he can share with us.
No, I don't have anything then.
I will then add this as a budget question, Ms. Burden, so that it could be followed up on.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Next, we have Ms. Cohen.
Thank you so much. I'm not even going to try my camera. I just following up with what Dr. Anderson said, certainly want to echo that, we really look forward to hearing from Sloan and seeing what strategies we can all commit to try to bridge this gap. And, I think it's a drum that we all continue to beat about trying to have some creativity around how we do things. And, I would add to that with the employee compensation piece. I know, Dr. Brabrand, that we were able to have a conversation on Friday, but, I think I think about when we look at like what a step increase means and what it means towards retirement, even if we're able to have conversations about a half step increase, which I know would be a nightmare and be restructuring how we do things. But, I want us to find ways to get to yes as creatively as we can. It may just look different than it normally has. And I understand how folks are feeling, that they want to see a real priority on learning loss. They want to see a priority on supporting our staff who've all gone above and beyond. And we feel that too as your board. And I know you all feel it as well. So, we want to figure out how to work with you, how to get here. I guess my next piece would be when we had conversations about TJ, we had a lot of conversations about how do we build the pipeline. And I recognize that there's a chunk that's sort of miscellaneous AAP, but I'd like to get some feedback from you all, and maybe Sloan is, Dr. Presidio is more appropriate, but how are we going to address the pipeline issues that we've continued to have these conversations around?
So I'm going to let Dr. Presidio bring his voice into the room. We have a little bit of that already identified in the budget as our first installment, and I'll let him speak to that as well as some two additional things that we're looking at as well. Dr. Presidio.
Sure. So I'd just share a few things to start the conversation. You know, obviously, as a result of the year-long external program review, there were a number of recommendations that the evaluators and researchers provided to the school system and to the board. And what we've tried to do is align our budget requests in Dr. Brabrand's proposed budget to those recommendations. So, you know, for example, one of the recommendations was around early talent development and starting developing that pipeline as early as possible. So we have, for the first time in our budget, actual line item dollars for supporting the expansion of the Young Scholars Program. So we're excited about that because that program starts with students in the early primary grades of elementary school, identifying talent and working to support those students to help them develop their talent. We had a very good conversation in senior leadership today discussing how we can better support that program in all of our schools. So that's one of the big areas about increasing that pipeline. The other biggest area and the biggest investment is around our advanced academic resource teachers. So we've got a multi-year proposal to get full-time advanced academic resource teachers in all of our elementary schools. So right now, I think as board members know that we're only staffing full-time AARTs in our Title I schools, but this budget proposal would include additional 18 FTE positions, and then over the coming 2 years, get us to full-time AARTs in all of our elementary schools. Additionally, we've got a proposal for half-time AARTs, advanced academic resource teachers, in our middle schools to continue to support and develop that pipeline, because when we identify students, particularly young scholars, we need to continue to serve them not just in elementary, but also in middle school. So making sure not only are they enrolled in accelerated and advanced math and science courses, but they're getting academic support and services to make sure that they're successful in those classes. So those are some of the major investments, I think, that we've recommended to the board in what is a long-term effort to really expand some of those pipeline issues and challenges that we're working on.
And Dr. Presidio, how do we then programmatically, when we talk about plugging AARTs full-time into all of our elementary schools, you know, what are we kind of willing to give up, I guess I would say, to make sure that they have consistent access to our kids and it's not taking away from other programs? That's one of the biggest, you know, complaints that we hear is that, you know, the way that we've structured AARTs in some of our schools, we wind up, you know, pulling kids out of science class to participate in, you know, level 3 programming. So how can we work with schools to make sure that they're getting, you know, really significant access to the AART?
Well, you know, that's one of those pieces where the professional development for those AARTs and for the principals is really important. And we do have ongoing professional development where we do ask the building principals and the AARTs to work with our central office staff on some of those issues and challenges. So we have models and supports and strategies for some of those challenges that you're referencing. You know, one of them is the integration of the AARTs pushing into the classroom and not just pulling kids out. So pushing in to provide instruction in the classroom for level 2 and level 3 services, as well as doing some of those specialized pullout programs. So I think it's really just the coordination, the collaboration, and the continuation of the professional development and work from central office, working with those site-based leaders as principals and AARTs is the biggest issue, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I'm going to argue that the way we develop our master schedules and the pressure on our principals to fit everything in is, I know, tremendous. So, you know, if we need to make adjustments when we talk about fit time or we talk about, you know, different opportunities at schools, you know, I want us to really be conscious of how we make this accessible to everybody. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. I mean, you know, our principals do have to balance out an awful lot in building their master schedules. So we just need to continue to work with them and support them on that. And be happy to have further conversation with the board about that as well.
Thank you, Dr. Presidio, Ms. Cohen. Next is Ms. McLaughlin, and she'll be followed next by Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Great. I appreciate following my colleagues. I think I want to touch on what they had to say first. I would ask Dr. Brabrand that you and your team, Ms. Burden talked about slide 10, that there's 31.6 million in matching funds that were going to be needed. This information is not on the PowerPoint. We've talked before that it's really hard for the public and for the board to follow some of these really important points that are being made when they're only in the verbal talking points. So I would ask again that the talking points of staff be sent to board members when there isn't a written report where we can find this information, because it's really hard to prepare and then follow, analyze, and follow up on it. So that's my first ask. The second thing, slide 12 was an executive summary statement. Again, if you actually look at the PowerPoint slide itself, I don't know how that qualifies as an executive summary, because I don't know what it's summarizing. And I truly appreciate that you are one of the most collaborative superintendents I've ever experienced. So I know you want that, but I just want to point out right off the bat, it's really hard. We just don't have the information. These PowerPoint slides are really not meant for that. They're supposed to capture a document that we can be working off of together, and we just don't have this information. I would also say that in terms of, I fully support and I'm hearing from our teachers and employees concerns about cost of living, not having those cost of living increases or any type of compensation for fiscal year 2022. We certainly need to be working with the county to look at our revenue source, to figure out ways that we have equity of any type of pay raise for all employees. But we also need to be looking at what's happening locally around us, statewide and nationally, in terms of healthcare costs, interest and inflation rates, and then what's happening with the revenue. I want to make sure that FCPS certainly matches what we see on the landscape for employee raises, and we need to bring that information back to our employees as well. We know with the pandemic, it had an economic effect, again, locally, statewide, and nationally. So all of that information needs to be part of the dialogue so our employees know that we're doing the best we can, given that 75 to 78% of our revenue comes from the county alone. The other question I want to point out to what Ms. Cohen said, I would just emphasize, Dr. Presidio, ideally we have a best-in-class master schedule, and then we refine it as needed to each individual school setting. So I guess a go back for me, Ms. Derenak Kofax, but I would like Dr. Brabrand to talk about my concerns about data and information in today's PowerPoint.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, one of the things, I don't know what happened, and we'll follow up. We did have talking points or narrative for the slides for you all, and I'll let Ms. Burden, we can follow you to make sure you get that. But we also have in our proposed budget, which is hundreds of pages, an executive summary section that's far more detailed than just this one slide. And maybe your point is on that we need to go to that executive summary at one of the future work sessions and just walk through it. It's about, I don't know, 15, 20 pages, and that might be a little bit more helpful than just this one slide we have on slide 12. So thanks for that feedback.
Sure, and obviously it needs to all be posted publicly so that the public can find it, and we know to withdraw those documents.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Corbett Sanders, followed by Ms. Tolan.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Brabrand, for referencing the budget book that was sent out to all of us. I received mine on Friday, and I am working through it. There's a lot of really valuable information. I do think it should be posted so that the public can also utilize it. But I do have some questions. Great news about the 82 million. I do wonder if the previous CARES Act and ESSA Act required that we could not supplant budget, but we could only supplement. Do we know if there is a similar requirement here?
Thank you, Ms. Corbett Sanders. And again, we're so excited about the additional dollars. And let me ask Ms. Burden, do you know yet anything on the supplement versus supplant piece that Ms. Corbett Sanders is talking about?
Yes, in the sense that we were told by a couple of different state sources that the allowable usages were the exact same as what they're calling ESSER 1, and this is ESSER 2. And the allowable usages are exactly the same.
So I will be making a suggestion that we have an aggressive legislative outreach that allows us to have grant funding for money for compensation rather than the matching grant. I raised this last week, and I think it's even more important now with that, because we do have to find a way of providing additional compensation for our staff. I'm particularly concerned that the healthcare costs have gone up, and we've increased our cost in our budget, but there are also employee costs. And how much is the cost for that as well? It would be horrible that we are not giving a raise, but we are seeing additional costs for our employees. Do you know that number, Ms. Burden?
I do not.
Okay, I'll send you a budget request on that. Unless I see Mr. Smith came on, does he have that answer?
No, I was simply going to say that we can provide that as an answer to a budget question.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and put that in, as well as information on the grant funding versus a matching grant. The CIO, I noticed that we discussed the CAO in the budget book, but we don't have any reference to the CIO in here on page. What's happening there?
So I can let Mr. Sethi explain a bit more about the CIO position, but we don't have that position in the budget book because we used current vacancies to create the funding. So it's not new funding for next year. It would be using existing funding to fund that particular position.
I understand that, Mr. Smith, but when we talk about the CIO, we did the exact same thing, but we didn't include that in the budget book. So I would just suggest that's probably something we need to be more explicit. On page 11 in the budget book, it shows that the fastest growth area is the non-school-based positions. So I would love to know exactly what those non-school-based positions are. It had a higher growth than other areas, and so that would be helpful. And along those lines, the budgeting for the legal department, are we planning on offsetting the growth in that budget with a decrease in outside attorneys' fees?
Yes, Ms. Corbett Sanders. That is indeed what we're trying to do with the legal fees. We are trying to reduce the external legal fees because it's much more cost effective to have internal counsel. And John can address that a little bit further. But I did want to say that on the non-school-based increase, that is merely a result of the permanent conversion of trades. So there was no dollar amount associated with those increases because they were the result of longstanding central office trades with logistics money for positions that we converted to positions with that logistics money.
That's fantastic to know. I'm going to actually ask that to be formally put in a budget question so that, because I know that the public will want to know that. It just stands out a bit awkwardly. I do have 2 additional questions, so please put me on the go back.
Absolutely. Ms. Tolan, followed by Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Yes, hi. I definitely echo my colleagues that I would definitely prioritize learning loss in our expenditures. And I'm hoping that we can be really creative in looking at some of these one-time expenditures of conversations, a number of conversations around things like virtual high schools moving forward come to mind, or virtual laboratory offerings of advanced courses, ways that we can utilize the expertise we've developed over this time frame and look carefully at what could be one-time expenditures to enhance those kinds of offerings to help our students, and then what would be reoccurring expenditures along with that. So Dr. Presidio, I know you've been doing quite a bit of work on this already, so I don't know if you've got any thoughts on how we could, potentially use some of this one-time money versus recurring funds.
Well, what we're working on right now is really trying to develop a robust summer program to support student acceleration of learning and extension of learning because of the effects and challenges that many of our students are facing during distance learning. So we're looking at programs across all grade levels, elementary, middle, and high, as well as expanding program opportunity and access for things like Young Scholars Program. And we're looking at, a Bridge to K program for those students who have either only experienced a virtual preschool experience or no preschool experience as a result of the pandemic. So those are the major things that we're looking at right now. And again, we'll have more information probably in the coming weeks to be able to share with the board, but we're working on finalizing some of those things right now.
Yeah, great, thanks. And I know this new money is very new information and good news. I do want to follow up on some of the technology questions that Karen Corpus-Sanders had. And Mr. Seti, I appreciate the information you gave me over the last week. I know on top of the CIO position being new in technology, we also had conversations about, enhancing our cybersecurity with a CISO position, a chief information security officer. And I wasn't sure based on the information that you gave me if we're still thinking about hiring someone in that role, or if you are looking at other ways to enhance our cybersecurity needs.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Stolen. From the day of
I can hear you.
We can hear you now.
From the day of the incident, we have invested tremendous amount of resources and continue to bolster our cybersecurity. We will be taking some currently open positions within the IT team and repurposing to create a lead sort of cybersecurity position within the department. Ultimately, the goal to align resources and have them just focus entirely on keeping the work of cybersecurity. But the work has started. We have multiple projects which we have initiated, and we plan to use existing open positions, as Marty had originally mentioned, to repurpose for the security role, lead security role.
Okay, so it sounds like that particular chief position is something that we're perhaps looking at not doing at this point in time. Is that correct?
It will be a position for leading security work. We internally are looking at how to mature the program. So while we need the focus on it, we have to also build the capacity within the teams. So there's a lot of work. Ultimately, when the team is fully fleshed out, I imagine it's just not one CISO who's kind of owning everything. I imagine it to be a team of a dozen people eventually who will have aspects of all of cybersecurity and risk management within the IT realm in their hands. So I'm building that team essentially at this point, and that position will be a lead position, maybe a CISO or maybe called something else, but certainly the entire job description is going to be on focusing on cybersecurity initiatives within the district.
Thank you. And please keep us informed on that. And thank you for your efforts. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Another area that I'm a little bit nervous about is, we've seen some of our numbers this year with, teachers retiring, leave of absences. We had a teacher shortage before COVID. And so I'm wondering about enhancing some of our, and not even just for teachers, enhancing our programs around Teachers for Tomorrow. We talked about Trades for Tomorrow, I believe, at our last meeting. But I understand we have got a shortage of bus drivers. Are we looking at programs in HR, for example, that we could enhance even with some of this one-time money to, make sure that we're prepared for next fall? I don't know if that's a question for Mr. McDonald, Dr. Brabrand.
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
I was just going to say that one of the challenges of one-time funds when we're looking at positions is that they're essentially one-year positions without building them into the base for the following year. So we'll certainly look at the needs of HR and possibly see how we might supplement with some funding, but it may not be with permanent positions. And we certainly know that an outlook might need more than just 1 year of additional supports to support the additional work of HR.
Right. I was just trying to be creative on, what kind of programs and not positions. And I know my time's up, so I will definitely go for a go back. Dr. Brabrand, were you going to add?
Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Brabrand. I was just going to say that we will certainly take that recommendation and certainly listen to all the recommendations from school board members as we think about how we're going to utilize the $83 million and the best path forward and bring that plan back to the board.
Yeah, Ms. Tolan, just a couple of nuggets just to remind the board first, and Mr. McDonald can add here. The number of resignations is not greater than what it was last year pre-COVID. So we're doing better than many systems. Downstate, we saw hundreds and hundreds of teachers decide to leave this school year. That did not happen in FCPS, thanks to the hard work and partnerships that HR's team has done. We are expanding Teachers for Tomorrow. We doubled the number of graduates that got contracts this past year, and we hope to expand the number of kids that we offer those 4-year contracts to, or excuse me, those contracts to after 4 years of college. And Trades for Tomorrow, Jeff can speak to that. We were getting that started, and we want to expand that program. And if we can use one-time money to do it, we'll certainly take a look at it. But it's absolutely, we've got to start growing our own as we face the future of the workforce in Fairfax. We've got our own kids here, and we need to keep them through focused programs like Trades for Tomorrow and Teachers for Tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I have had a request from some of my colleagues, staff. We would love to see your shining, smiling faces as we speak to you. It's helpful. So if you are able, and if your broadband is capable, we ask that you do that. And Dr. Brabrand, I know you shut yours off. Your problem appears to be like with your mic or something, because you still keep going in and out. Maybe sign off and sign on again.
Sign off and come back in. My apologies.
Yeah. But anybody who can and would like to, we would appreciate that. No force, but we do appreciate it. We next have Ms. For questions, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Thank you. I was waiting for my camera to turn on. So thank you, Ms. Derenak Kofax, and thank you, staff, for these detailed presentations and for all the hard work on the budget. Of course, there are many, many things that we all wish we could fund for next year, given the budget picture. I'm glad to see some of our priorities there. I would like to ask a couple questions. First, you may not have information about this yet, but I know that the governor announced his desire for year-round schools. And to be honest, I think it's something worth looking into, at least for next year, maybe with extra funds or extra time for remediation as part of our plans. And after school, I know we talked about enhanced summer school, but is there, I think Dr. Brabrand said that we have until September 2023 to use the additional funds, but my concern is for even beyond that, for long-term learning loss. Are there thoughts of how we can sort of fund really sort of innovative changes to the way we provide education to deal with some of these long-term learning losses, and whether that's year-round schools, like the governor said, or other ideas? So just some thoughts, and it's kind of a broad question, but around that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I'm going to let Dr. Presidio answer with some additional detail. Real quick, I'd say one thing, and can you hear me better now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Rachna, one thing I think we need to make a distinction on, and I know we're going to be talking about the calendar, is a year-round calendar versus year-round learning opportunities. Not every kid may need a year-round calendar, but many of our students are going to need year-round learning opportunities. And I think that's where we've got to continue to think out of the box, and we are. And we'll be bringing you some of those ideas shortly. Dr. Presidio, anything you'd want to add?
No, I don't think I would add too much to that. I think probably it's best to kind of put together our initial thinking with the proposal and associated budget and costs that the board could have a better understanding of what that might look like. So for right now, I think that's probably sufficient.
Great. Thank you. I'm sorry, Dr. Brabrand, I didn't mean to cut you off if you were trying to talk.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Sure. Another thing that I wanted to ask about in the budget wise, in many of my conversations that I had with principals, one of the themes that kept coming up was the need for an additional sort of instructional coach type position to really, have some flexibility for each principal to have a math coach or a reading coach or just a coach to help with the instruction. And given the remediation needs next year and the work our teachers will have to do to help our kids remediate and sort of catch up, is there room in the budget or thought about these sort of positions to help our principals out, especially since they're doing a lot more work on kind of helping families and connecting with communities?
So the budget right now doesn't have additional identified instructional coaches. We have, and I don't know who could speak to the instructional coach. We have instructional coaches in many schools. Principals do have some flexibility each year as they come to staffing. We at this point have not changed staffing standards to make them worse. But I think many of our principals need to be looking at when they make trades, and I know the RAS reviews those trades around building instructional capacity, particularly this coming year when we know, as you said, that they're going to be real learning impacts. So I think it's a discussion our Dr. Ivy and our RAS will have with principals now more than ever. Every principal every year looks at their school and their needs, but looking at instructional loss and the kind of staff you need to support that may mean some staffing changes this year as they go to staffing in April, March and April, in just a few months.
Along those lines, I appreciate that. I mean, I know it's a tough budget year and there's balance needed with what I know is my primary focus in many is on remediation, but I also want to make sure that we do what we can, similar to what we're asking for the state and holding us harmless from the lack of, from the decrease in enrollment, to hold our school programs harmless as well. And I'm specifically talking about arts programming that are really having difficulty recruiting students this year, given what the realities of our co-curricular classes have been and the inequities between sports and co-curriculars that we've had since July. So I would put a plug in that as we're looking at our staffing formulas for our buildings, that we look at holding our arts programs harmless instead of, forcing sort of the same staffing requirements. So that's the plug I like to put in there, because I'm worried that at some of our schools, it's going to be detrimental for many years on our arts programming. And it's been difficult. So that's
understood.
The other thing I wanted to talk about was, I love our work on restraint and seclusion. I'm really thrilled with our new policy, but I think we need to look at needs-based staffing for our BITs and whether we need to have some additional supports around providing supports to our schools that had a higher population of students maybe at risk. So I just want to put that plug out there. I may need to go back. So thank you very much. And if anyone wants to comment on that, I'd welcome a comment on that piece of it.
Any comments?
All right. Thank you, Ms. Jennifer. Thank you, Steph.
Yes. Ms. Keys-Gamarra, followed by Ms. Marin.
Thank you. Trying to get my camera on. I'm glad to follow my colleague, because as we are looking at this budget as well as the one-time funding, I am wondering what actual data we have. So for example, it was just mentioned having data for what is needed for BITs. For example, do we have, Dr. Presidio, information showing us that we are making headway with certain programs that we have monies going into, such as Young Scholars, AARTs, even some of the recommendations coming out of the AAP study? Because I'd like for our community to be able to see that our decisions are data-based. So I'll start there.
No, that's a great question. And I think we have a lot of data that we can share on different programs. And certainly, I'd encourage board members to submit budget questions if there are specific, data sets that you'd like to look at. The one that you mentioned, though, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, like Young Scholars and advanced academic resource teachers, what we do know is when we've looked at data for our Young Scholars program, that we have very strong data that indicates that young scholars that are identified early are typically found eligible for level 4 services, and that when we track the data historically, that those students tend to take advanced classes at middle school and high school and perform very well at the A or the B level in those classes. So we have a lot of information, a lot of data, I think, that could support a lot of those budget requests. If anybody has questions about those, you can certainly submit them as budget questions or directly to me as well.
I certainly will submit a data request so that I feel that the community can feel comfortable with the recommendations. You talked a lot about students that can be identified early. And this may be because I haven't had time to go through the 100+ pages of the budget, but are there things specifically in there for students coming into our system to make sure that we're supporting them beginning from the time they walk in our schools in developing those math skills that they would need if they were to engage in advanced academics and or science, etc. Because not every child that comes into our school is on the same level playing field. So where would those investments be?
Well, I think a lot of those investments are again found in the expansion of the advanced academic resource teachers into full-time positions, because it's those advanced academic resource teachers that work with the classroom teachers to provide those learning experiences for students that are so critical, and provide the ability to identify those students for the Young Scholars program. So we have a lot of existing curriculum materials that we just need to make sure that we can get in front of our students. And again, it's those teacher leaders, as Ms. Sizemore-Heiser said, instructional coaches. Instructional coaches in our budget come by different names. So advanced academic resource teachers really are instructional coaches in the AAP curriculum areas. So I think that's the biggest investment probably that we have in this particular budget. Giving all the budget challenges and constraints that we put forward, is in that additional staffing. But we also have, additional funds for the Young Scholars program in this budget proposal. So providing, and what those funds will do is provide for after school opportunities and summer opportunities for students to experience some of those challenging math and science learning opportunities beyond the school day. So those are probably the two biggest investments that we have in this budget.
Okay, so I guess a question to further delineate that. With respect to the 82 million, I would like to see how we could possibly look at putting in those supports in our schools that helps everyone understand that we really are making sure everybody is safe in our schools. I know the vaccination is coming, but it's my understanding that it will take some time for everyone to, kind of feel safe with that. And so is that something that we can try to identify, such as testing, mediation efforts, additional teams and things of that nature, now that we know that we have this type of funding? Dr. Brabrand.
Yeah, we can look at additional uses as we look at this funding around our safety teams. Look, those safety teams are still going to be important, even with the vaccination. We know that every teacher will be taking the vaccination, though we're going to certainly highly encourage it, as you know. We know that students still aren't going to have access to the vaccination for some time. Both vaccinations right now, one is 18 and over, the Moderna, and Pfizer is only for 16 and over. So those safety teams are only going to continue to be important. And I'll work with Mr. Smith and his team about what additional supports are needed from those dollars.
So I'm surprised my colleague, the champion of nurses, didn't mention this, but with these additional funds, might we also be able to try to make sure that we have appropriate medical support personnel within the schools so that everyone feels that we have enough eyes and ears to keep a safe environment?
Yes, we'll certainly look at that, and the General Assembly is in the middle of doing that same discussion too. So we're going to closely coordinate that. There's a couple of models right now that are around in the General Assembly around school nurses, and so we'll keep you posted on what that looks like and what the additional costs would be for us.
Okay, and just flushing out, I know we've seen lots of reports about students with increased numbers of F's, if I could just finish, increased numbers of F's, as well as high school students who feel like they've missed out on so much of the high school experience. I'm wondering if you can give us some recommendations and funding from that 82 million that might help to address some of those concerns.
Yes, we will. And I want to say something to that, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, that we met with students this week, and we are going to find innovative ways to let students know it is far from over. Their year is lost. Their grades up to now represent the past. We have the present and future before us, and we're not going to give up on our kids this year. We're going to redouble our efforts. We're going to be innovative, and we're going to give every chance to cross the finish line with the knowledge and skills they need and help them get caught up after going through this terrible pandemic.
So I look forward to seeing that package. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And if I could add, I just want to have a follow-on about additional positions within the budget. So as we look at adding any additional positions in the budget with the use of one-time funds, if they're recurring positions, we'll have to find those dollars at some point down the road. And so it may not be in the next year's budget, but if we would like to keep those positions within the base of the budget, we would have to identify a recurring funding source to keep those positions. And so we'll look at that and take that into consideration with any positions that we recommend adding with these one-time funds and bring back recommendations to the board for how we might find recurring dollars to support those positions in the future.
I'm not sure you understood what can I clarify? Because I think he misunderstood what I said.
Go ahead, and then we can have it to go back as well. Just clarify.
Well, when I said the only positions I think I was talking about was nurses and things of that nature to try to deal with concerns as a result of COVID. So I think it would be clear that that may not be a recurring position. So
yeah,
thank you.
For that clarification.
Okay.
Ms. Marin, followed by Ms. Pekarsky.
Hi there. Good afternoon. Yeah, I just want to say there are a few things that I found particularly exciting in the budget, well, among a lot, but particularly cybersecurity, given what we experienced this year with being attacked by international terrorists, school nurses, given where we are with our public health needs, and equity staff. So thank you for hearing the board's input and reflecting that in a lot of the proposal. I want to just say that when we talk about things like healthcare, it's a 4.9% increase, and that's because it's private sector health costs. And items like that, items like the fact that we have a third of our children living in poverty, that's almost 59,000 students that we have living in poverty. I think, we need to keep saying that we are trying to offer public education and its mission to educate every child among circumstances in the community that are pressing on us with challenges that are beyond our control. So, I just want to mention that and how hard these challenges are, especially for the public to understand why we can't do everything because we need everyone's help. I did want to say, 86% of our investment in our schools is on instruction, and that's our people. So I certainly would love to see us do something to support our staff, especially after this year. The elementary school principal parity, was something that was disappointing not to see, but if we can do something to honor their work, I think that would be appropriate. I also am wondering, I think Ms. Cohen mentioned about the AAP review and what that money might be used for. I'm also wondering about the timing of that and the special education audit review, when we think we'll be able to, use those funds, just what you're thinking about that is, Dr. Brabrand and some of your staff. And then finally, I did want to ask about the cost of the AP and IB courses. I actually pulled up a question from FY 2018. It's question, 29. And it looks like we spend about $500,000 on registration fees. Now, I know that we pay for 6 tests, I think, over a student's course, experience at FCPS. But, when I hear that students are stressed, and I was just yesterday on the Student Superintendent's Advisory Council, hearing from dozens of students say how tough it is right now, and AP and IB certainly aren't helping with changing their policies. So I hear this stress, and then we're paying for 6 tests, which seems quite generous. I'd like to understand more about, do we really need to be paying that much? Would it be reasonable to have 4 courses, paid for on a sliding scale? Then if students can't afford, of course, we should support them. So I would like perhaps to have a resubmit of that question, FY 2018, and add more to update it for this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marin. Next, we have, well, I know you do want them to speak to that a little bit, the AP and the IB.
Just a special, no, not the AP, just a special ed review and the AP review, if there was more about the timing of making those decisions, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Lee, do we know that? Do we have that, or is Ms. Coe here? Does the general know when the special ed review is complete, or Marty? Do either of you know? I don't know if Ms. Coe is on this tonight.
Yeah, my understanding is that it was expected to start soon, but would not be completed by this summer, but would be certainly fully underway this summer. And as far as the AAP, you've included in the budget the funding for the first phase, the recommendations from that review. So I don't know how many phases they recommended, but we did fund the first phase for the AAP review.
Okay, I might follow up for a little bit more.
So Ms. Marin, with that then, if the placeholder comes after May, the report come in the summer, we still can look at doing something with those recommendations. The school board can, prior to its recess in August, so that we can have recommendations to implement in the school year. Some, again, we don't know what they are. Some may require another year, but ones that we can implement quickly, we would certainly do. And the budget of 2018, that was prior to my arrival. I know the prior board had vigorously rigorous discussion about AP and IB funds, and we can certainly have a discussion later. But I also encourage you to talk to some of the board members who were there for that. I was not, and there's a lot of background that we probably need to bring to that as we look at any other changes we would want to make.
Okay, thank you for that. Will do. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Ms. Pekarsky, followed by Ms. Omesh.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Brabrand, I want to commend you. I think you have tried to hit many of the priority areas that you've heard from us in the last year, really, with the reality of a very constrained fiscal forecast at best. I was very pleased to see, especially the ESOL staffing, and really look forward to finding a way to fully meet that, staffing goal. I think that is a big need, and especially when we're talking about remediation and, getting over COVID and the loss, I think that is a part of that.
Thank you.
I'm also anxious to hear the full remediation plan, as I know all of my colleagues are. One of the questions I had was really, while not a large budget item, nonetheless, I'm interested in the middle school AART, and I know Dr. Presidio talked a little bit about that, but I'm still struggling to kind of see the natural fit at a middle school level for that, when we have the many course offerings, the honors courses that are voluntary. So I don't know if maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, because while it's few, it sets up a plan for more.
Dr. Presidio?
Yeah, sure. So I think, it's really important to keep in mind that when we have students that are accessing advanced courses, we need to make sure that we're supporting them to be successful in those courses as well. So when we've really pushed and encouraged students to challenge and push themselves to sign up in those courses, we do have a responsibility to make sure that they're successful. And that's a big piece of what our advanced academic resource teachers would do with this investment, is to provide those opportunities to coach, mentor, and support students in those classes. But it's not just what happens in the classrooms. It's also what needs to happen through our enrichment programs, after-school programs, summer programs that are going to make sure that we're really cultivating and nurturing students' interests. And it's not just in math and science, right? We know because of TJ that there's a huge interest right now in making sure that our advanced academic program is creating equitable opportunities for students in our middle schools to be able to be considered for application competitively in TJ, and we're working on that. That's a big piece of what this would do. But it's also about taking the time to really connect with students, identify students' individual interests, passions, and experiences that we can create that are going to nurture and support those interests and those talents. So there's a lot for those folks to do, in addition to the job of providing direct services to students and coaching and supporting teachers in curriculum development and instructional delivery. So there really is a huge need there. And I can certainly appreciate that, it's a new position, so it's hard to kind of envision what that would look like. But there's multiple roles for direct support services to students, extension of learning, as well as teacher coaching and development. So there really is quite a lot there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Can you talk a little bit about FCPS on as well, and where we are with that? At some point we talked about maybe new devices and looking at a more appropriate devices for our younger students. Where have we left off?
Mr. Smith?
Yes, I'm just turning my camera on. So yes, so we are in the process of that device review. We've pulled our stakeholder groups together and looking at that best possible device. And when we look at the possible use of these one-time funds, we will certainly consider the cost of those devices and how we might best use these funds for those device purchases and or lease. But again, we're getting very good feedback from our stakeholders and are looking at bringing some options back to share with the board.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all I have right now.
All right, thank you. I have Ms. Omesh followed by Mr. Frisch.
Thank you. And thank you to staff as always. I'm pleased to see certain things reflected. You know, while I'm skeptical always of central office positions, something like an equity specialist, et cetera, is encouraging. I do have questions though, especially with some of the technology investments, just looking at, I saw, you know, I know the 11 million is being rolled back, but the web conferencing at 4 million, the SBITs at 4 million, recurring fee funds, based on the past, given that we're going to be going back, can someone just explain a little bit of the thinking there?
I don't understand your question.
I think I do. Mr. Smith, do you want to talk a little bit about the longstanding need in elementary schools around technology support and instructional support reflected with SBITs and T-specs?
So those additional dollars are tied to the additional devices that we've brought into buildings. And so when you bring in additional devices, there is always additional support for the professional development aspect for teachers and also for the hardware and upkeep support. So if that's what you're asking as it relates to those individual positions, it's to support those additional devices. When we look at the web conferencing tool, there are some costs that we build in as we transition from Blackboard to Zoom. We know that our original Blackboard contract was a much smaller contract because we weren't using it in the way that we're using it now. And so in looking at those additional costs for Zoom and that expanded use, we've built that into the particular contract. And we'll look to see that contract decreasing over time, depending upon our future use.
Yeah, I'm confused. I mean, it's the 8 million, but we're not having digital school next year, right? So I mean, I understand some of the needs, but sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so for a couple of things, we all expect, again, I'm very, very hopeful. We're following the latest science that things are going to be able to return to normal for next school year. That's what we all want. I am praying and thinking and discerning about it every day. That's the plan. We need to be ready to pivot, though, if there were any developments that happened that would prevent us from doing that. And so we still need this infrastructure to provide the technology devices to kids and the supports. And the T-specs represent the support for those devices. The SBITs represent the training of the teachers around technology. And even when we come back to school, and normally, what is going to be a revolution is our teachers are going to use technology in new and different ways in the schools, even in the classrooms. Flexibility around the learning, training for that learning. So these are things that I think are still going to be important even as we return to normal. And I think it gets to some of the things other board members are talking about. How does the school day look differently now that kids have this access to technology? How do we change calendars? I don't know that we're going to do it all at once, but we're going to have more flexibility on things that before it was we got to do the same old, same old. And I think this gives us the infrastructure to do it both with the devices and with the training and PD for teachers.
And I would also ask Dr. Presidio to weigh in. When we look at that line item for SBITs and digital resources, there are only about 13.5 positions within that line item. Those digital resources, though, include the resources for ST Math, Imagine Learning, Talking Points, and so those are contractual costs. But I think that Dr. Presidio could speak to that a bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. And those materials and resources that you just mentioned, along with those SBITS positions, are are things that we have purchased using previous dollars to make sure that learning was successful this year. And these items in this budget provide a continuation of those supports and services, both the materials, the resources, and those SBIT positions.
Yeah, one more thing, Abrar, that you brought up that's so important, and I want to say this to the board and the community. We want to be normal next year, desperately. But one thing that we have to understand, based on everything we hear now, there's not a vaccination schedule for our kids between now and next August. There are still families, even though kids have been disproportionately not impacted by COVID, we will still have some families who would choose to have their kids remain virtual. And we're going to need to be able to provide supports for those families who want to wait another year or another semester at least to stay in a virtual place. I don't think we can't discount yet that some families will still choose a virtual play to begin next year. We don't know the numbers yet. We're registering like it's a normal year, but we are going to face a moment as we get to the late spring and summer where some families will evaluate conditions and say, you know what? Yeah, I want to be back in Fairfax, but I want to stay virtual, or I want to come back, but I want to come back to the school system, but I want to start in a virtual manner. So I think both of those options we've still got to be prepared for.
And Dr. Brabrand, if I could just add, another key piece of information and decision-making on what next year looks like will be if we are going to need to continue to socially distance. And if we do, especially if it's 6 feet, we are very much so going to have to rely on the technology and make sure that we have the staff and resources to support it.
I mean, thank you all for elucidating that. I mean, it's a completely different conversation to have, to think about a possibility of planning for virtual next year. I think I certainly didn't anticipate that. So it's good to understand that that's part of the thinking here. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser mentioned earlier the idea of this, what the governor announced of potential extension of school and whatnot. Where's the fifth quarter possibility reflected?
Anything around the fifth quarter would be coming with what we would look at for our extended learning plans. And again, that's something Dr. Presidio and his team are hard at work at, and we'll work very shortly to get time to share that plan with the board. We're still finishing it up, to be honest. We spent the winter break, or more accurately, Dr. Presidio and his team spent the winter break working on return to school and this summer school fifth quarter bridge programming. And we're very excited that we can bring some new things, but we know when we bring something, there are a lot of board questions, and we want to make sure what we have is spit and polish. So just a bit more time, we'll have it ready. And I want to just be clear, I don't want to open hybrid again, Ms. Omesh. We've got to see where the CDC goes. We really need we need the vaccination to get us to a point where the social distancing requirement is not 6 feet, because it's back to the same issue. Again, you can't keep kids 6 feet apart and get every kid in all day, 5 days a week. So I'm very hopeful that we're not going to have to go there, but it's way too early for us to be able to walk away from it and not have a plan B if we need it.
Okay, with that in mind, you recall in the regular meeting, I had three questions. So has the equity team, or Dr. Wilson had the chance, or Williams, sorry, to look at this? And has she weighed in, and what conversation has happened on that?
Yeah, I mean, not to do a play-by-play, but we had a cabinet meeting this week. Dr. Wilson was at it, and Dr. Presidio presented his first draft. We had conversation. There's still more work to do. Dr. Williams did weigh in with questions, and we're still making sure this reaches our own satisfaction before we would send it to the board. But we'll work with the chair, vice chair to schedule some time as part of these upcoming budget discussions Clearly the board wants to see it, and we're just trying to get it done fast enough, but not so fast that it's work that doesn't represent all the stakeholders. And Dr. Williams just arrived officially December 30th, so she wasn't here as we were doing some of the preliminary work.
Okay, and were any adjustments made, you know, reflecting whatever equity feedback was offered?
Absolutely, absolutely. No, her voice, I mean, you know, I know many of you have already reached out to Dr. Williams. You can ask her whether she feels she's being fully utilized in our work thus far. I won't speak for her on that comment, but yes, we're bringing her into all of our discussions, personnel discussions and budget discussions, along with her work with her own equity staff. So this is exactly part of the role that we wanted, and she's raising good questions that we want to be able to answer ourselves before we're bringing it to the board.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to know that. I think there's something that's still a little bit off to me. I know there are things that are reflected, but thinking of the gaps that we're anticipating, what we know is going to happen, and the, you know, not investing a significant amount of our monies into tutoring or, you know, remedial services or whatever it's going to be. I mean, can you speak to some of the thinking that's gone on that? I mean, it's going to be a massive, you know, issue.
Right. Well, one, you're going to see that we have worked on that. And two, I know Dr. Williams is here, and let me let her bring her voice into the room.
Good evening. I'm on the call, and I do appreciate the query about the inclusion of the equity lens in these decisions. And certainly to Dr. Braybrand's point, we have been in the team, and both the team and myself have been involved in those discussions. I think the larger question that you're asking, actually, Dr. Presidio and I just talked about that tonight. You know, thinking about all of the gaps that will have emerged as a result of things that families could not control. So as we are getting additional resources and we're thinking about extra programming and we're thinking about what the data tells us about what works, and quite frankly, the ways in which we haven't pushed ourselves, I would submit that we are very much at that place where we're trying to figure out what things can look like. So that they're not fully formed ideas, I think, is a consequence of us still trying to learn and understand and assess the resources we have available. So that would be my offering.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, because, you know, in looking at it, I would want us to make sure we set aside the monies for this, right? I mean, when we evaluate priorities, absolutely advanced academics is something we've been talking about. We want to improve, et cetera. But if we have kids that are getting Fs and need to get back, I'm not interested in funding advanced academics this year. I want to see us putting it into tutoring or something, right? So this is where something about this is a little bit off to me, and I hope that the continued conversations assess that properly. There were two last asks I had in that regular meeting, the needs-based assessment and any room for unique advocacy for us, if you could address those, but thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll put you on for a go back so you can.
Those are questions though, but I'm done after that.
All right. All right.
If someone's gonna answer the questions.
So Abrar, I don't know if I got the last part. Let me go back on your first question, and because I started to read the other two. Your first question again there just a second ago. The learning loss. I want to be sure and remind the board, we get schools dollars, hourly funds at the tune of several $1 million at the beginning of this year to identify student learning loss and to use those monies. So have that money at the ready. Some have used it. Some, I'll be honest, are waiting for this return to school or each wave as the kids come in person because they want to do those interventions in person. Now, there'll still be kids with Fs that don't come in person and they're going to need interventions virtually. So we have several $1 million that schools already have in their accounts. Also looking at, as Dr. Presidio and Dr. Williams are saying, with plans about what's our division-wide response going to be to fit to interventions this second semester, to a bridge program into next year, you know, sort of what we used to do things called Jumpstart, getting kids early into the school year. So all that's on the table, but we're trying to make sure we don't just bring up all the old oldies but goodies, that they're refined, that they're data supported, and that we know that it's going to be targeted to the kids that need it most, not just an overall program and then it's come first serve. We've got to target this programming to the kids who needs-based staffing and advocacy. You're talking about our needs-based staffing budget, looking at that. And your question about that was, do I have any change?
I had originally requested that we look at both alongside each other, right? So the budget with a needs-based budget and then what we have based on the crunch we're in, so that we can identify how we're prioritizing.
Oh, I think we'll just better need to work offline or get the budget and we can certainly break down the needs-based staffing and talk about it in more detail.
Thank you, Dr. Brabrand. Mr. Frisch.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Ms. Marin and Ms. Derenak-Kofax for their work on the budget, as well as our staff. I had a conversation with our budget chair, Ms. Marin, the other day and told her I appreciate the pickle that we're in, given how little new funding we have for these priorities. I don't think there's any point in covering the same ground as my colleagues. I also agree that addressing learning loss and compensation are a must. I also echo Ms. Sizemore-Heiser's concerns about holding our arts programming staff harmless for fluctuations in student population. On the compensation front, I'm curious if any thought has been given to, I think I heard you right, Dr. Brabrand, saying that one of the things we're checking on is how this new money could be used. Can it be used for compensation? I think I heard that from you. If that is the case,
that's correct.
Are we thinking of, you know, ways that we can be flexible there? Whether it's, you know, if it's only one-time funding that we may not have again, have you thought about bonuses for staff? You know, what are the ways that we're looking at getting money into the pockets of these teachers that we've been, you know, leaning on really hard this year?
Right. So two things there, Mr. Frisch. Thank you so much. One, we're going to pursue as much flexibility around the funds to provide additional supports for our school district, including compensation. That's number one. We're going to look at every piece. It needs to be tied to the pandemic, but I think there may be ways that we can make that happen. That's number one. Can we be flexible but still under the state guidance? Number two, there are ways, and we are starting to do it, Carl, where we look at dollars that were already in the budget that maybe we can just use one-time money for now, and we can take those reoccurring dollars and assign it to compensation or assign student learning loss. So are there expenses right now that we could really get with just doing one time, but then take that reoccurring savings and start to add that up like a piggy bank for compensation only? And that compensation dollars then, you know, are larger than what we would have had before.
Yeah, I imagine a lot of this conversation is about like exactly where we're allocating the money from for each individual need. When do you anticipate that we'll have any clarity on exactly how this funding can be used?
Well, gosh, I mean, you know, when you get things at 8:30 in the morning and it's 5:30, you know, I don't know completely yet. I'm going to push full court press to get as much flexibility from the state to use this money in the way that we need to. And I'm confident that our relationship with the state and my relationship with the state superintendent will give us as much flexibility as anybody could get across the country. I don't know when our next budget meeting is. Certainly, I know for the next budget meeting, this board is going to want to see updates around the extended learning opportunities for kids and compensation. So certainly by then, no, Ms. Burden, do we know when our next budget meeting is, or is that something we have to schedule with the budget?
January 27th, Dr. Brabrand.
2 weeks from now. So we'll have an update in 2 weeks.
The calendar can do that to us. Final question. On the issue of my understanding is the state has this pot of money that they have offered to kind of match to get us there for a teacher pay increase. Has there been any indication about any flexibility around when that could be triggered? You know, like if the money isn't there this year, is it something that we could roll over and kick in next year?
Ms. Burden, I can't. We can't hear anyone.
Well, this got awkward. Can anybody hear us?
You stumped them.
I can
hear you.
Can
you all hear me?
Yeah, he got picked up.
Yeah.
This is Jeff Bradbury.
We can hear Jeff.
Yep, we can hear Jeff.
Well, that's great. And the unfortunate thing is that I don't know the answer to the question, but it's like, I'm probably glad I get to add to the content of today's meeting, and I have nothing to add.
The comedy silence of Jeff Plattenberg.
Is this thing on?
I'm on. I lost you all for like a minute or two. I'm not sure why.
Mr. Frisch, please repeat your question then.
Sure. So my question is, this kind of match from the state for a teacher pay increase, is there any flexibility on when that could be triggered by our own piece of the pie? Is it something we can roll over to help pay for next year if we don't have the funding this year? What I'm trying to do is figure out a creative way of getting there.
Yeah, historically, I mean, the state has, you know, a handful, not many, of funding line items that they will allow us to carry over that are, you know, potentially unused, like at-risk funding, stuff like that into the next year. But I have never seen compensation be one of those. And you should also know that the CARES Act, you know, USCD certification agreement under ESSER says that funds generally will not be used for bonus, merit pay, or similar expenditures unless related to disruptions or closures resulting from COVID-19. But having said that, it's just as Dr. Brabrand said, we know that some divisions have used some of their March funding to provide hazard pay to teachers in recognition that, you know, their jobs are very different in this year than in other years, and potentially longer hours and that sort of thing. So that's why we're being, you know, cautious about what we say, because we really are going to need to get some more detailed information about how that would work, or if it would work at all.
I guess part of the question then becomes, if there is no flexibility around this matched money from the state, from the Commonwealth, is it something that we can ask Mike Malloy and his team to advocate for flexibility in Richmond as the General Assembly comes back to work? Here's why. I mean, it may be unusual, but the circumstances are unusual, right? Like, this money is new now in the middle of an economic crisis for local and state governments. So the presumption that we would all have this money laying around to kick in our own part to trigger this in less than 1 year's time, you know, maybe that's a bit much to swallow. Maybe our friends in the legislature could see fit to give us more time.
Mr. Malloy is on this call, and Mr. Malloy has his hand up. So, and we just spoke to them this weekend. So we talked about flexibility.
I saw that. Thank you for your update.
I figured since I heard my name, I better jump in. Mr. Frisch, I think, at least in part to answer your question, the state has provided flexibility for teacher salary increases, but they typically only do that within a biennium as opposed to across biennia. So right now we're within the 21-22 state biennial budget. What will happen is that after 22, we will get an entirely new budget in 23. In fact, we will have an entirely new everything in 23, and that'll become the 23-24 biennial budget. Typically, the flexibility that they've given for salaries hasn't crossed over budgets, because what that would do is that would obligate the next budget writer. So the next budget that the governor were to write would have to include that funding in that budget. And they typically won't do that across the biennium. Now, they've done look backs, like they've said, if you've given, for instance, if you gave a raise in 21, they'd let you carry that forward as part of your qualification for 22. But that I don't think does us any good in this situation. And it's certainly something that we can advocate for in terms of flexibility, in terms of how they're going to use this funding. The only discussions that I've heard at the state level so far about the funding for the bonus is the possibility that the bonus may actually turn into a salary increase, which creates an entirely different conversation for you all. But that's the only direction that I've heard the state talking in terms of what that funding might turn into.
So the answer is there's not a lot of flexibility. I got it.
Well, Mr. Frisch, I want to say this. Some districts have looked at how to be flexible. We're going to look at how to be flexible within the guidelines. And I'm not prepared to say that we can't find different ways to think about it as we get this second wave of stimulus funding. We just haven't had time yet to really roll up our sleeves. Last time we were in the middle of a crisis, as we still are, but I think there may be ways to skillfully look at how we can replace one-time money that we got now and free up operating dollars that could be legitimately used for anything, and that anything could be compensation for our employees. But it's going to take a skillful review of the budget to see where we can make those substitutes.
Well, I don't have to tell you that we're all eager to see the result of that skillful review. So thank you for all the work that went into this and what will go into that skillful review.
Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Frisch. I will take a quick turn as also Dr. Brabrand, as we have talked during our budget meetings, I do appreciate the identified investments. I think you have listened to the board, and I do feel good about where we are, even if they are not in totality where we might have liked. The advanced academic resource teachers right now, I do want to remind my colleagues that it's just not for that, it's for identification purposes as well. And Dr. Brabrand, what is the phase-in of this right now? Is it a 3-year phase-in? This being, last year was phase 1, so now it's 3 more years in addition to this.
I'll defer to Sloan. Sloan presented to me.
I think this plus 2 years, right?
This plus 2 additional years for a total of a 3-year phase-in.
A 3-year phase-in for this part of it.
And Ms. Derenak Kofax, we originally saw a 5-year plan, and I talked to Dr. Presidio that we needed a more aggressive plan, and that's what we presented to you all. And so this is the first of 3 years.
No, that's much appreciated, because as my colleagues and you all know, these have been identified not only by our a team of experts that came in from the outside, but also they've been identified as things that we need investments from our own, advanced academic resource advisory panel, and as well as MSAOC, our Minority Student Achievement Oversight Committee. So I think that's important that we are finally doing that. ESOL staffing, Dr. Presidio, could you please expand on these 50 additional positions? They are slated for the elementary levels, correct? And if you could speak a little bit to how you see them helping in the elementary school, easing the teacher's burden.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is one of a multi-year phase-in recommendation that we would have for the board. And largely this is coming from the large caseloads that our teachers do have. And that's true at all of the levels. But in addition to the large caseloads, one of the things that the state has actually done is develop some staffing standard recommendations that they're working to put into the SOQs. And basically what the new recommendations call for is looking at staffing based on the levels of student proficiency. So we, of course, have English language learners at a wide range of proficiency from newcomers through, level 4 services that they're receiving. And what these staffing standards would do, and what we've reflected here with putting these additional positions at the elementary level, would allow us to staff more based on the language proficiency levels in a particular school. So some of our schools have larger numbers of English language learners, and some of our schools have larger numbers of emerging and level 1 and level 2 English language learners. And this would be the first step in applying a differentiated staffing standard based on levels of proficiency of students at the elementary level. We do currently staff our middle school and our high schools based on the proficiency levels of students, but we don't do that currently at elementary. So that's why they're targeted for elementary.
Tammy, you're muted.
My dog was barking. So do you have, Dr. Presidio, information on, will you shortly have information on which schools you're thinking these 50 positions will be distributed amongst?
Yeah, they'd be allocated out again. Basically would allow us to update our staffing standards across elementary schools. So that would be something that we would develop as the staffing process this year in the spring. So we wouldn't have that right now. It would depend on the student enrollment and the levels of students. We would have that in the spring, and we could share that with the board at that time.
Okay, in the spring, prior to adoption, though, of the budget.
Well, that's when we do our projections, but we can't until the board formally approves the budget, of course. But we could give you projections later in the spring.
Correct. Yeah. Yes. And also, is this budget addressing the issue of young scholars?
So we do have money in the budget specifically for the Young Scholars Program. And I think it's $200,000 as a direct line item to support young scholars in the budget, as well as, again, providing an additional, well, let me back up, providing additional full-time AARTs who will also be able to support the Young Scholars Program. So those are the largest investments to support young scholars, is that direct budget for after-school summer programs, and then the full-time positions for the AARTs.
And so the $200,000 will be just allocated more for after-school programming?
It would be allocated, again, depending on the school's programs and what they're able to offer right now. It would either be a mix of after-school or summer programs.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll be looking forward to talk to you a little bit more about this as we go on. So thank you. But I do appreciate where we are headed on that very much. As my colleagues have stated, I am anxious to hear your plans, and Dr. Brabrand and Ms. Burden, please, use Ms. Marin and I to, as part of your team when you're talking about this, to make sure we hear what you're thinking and we can share with the board, and we can work as a team together on this as we understand better as a board what the parameters are in this $83 million. This is Dr. Brabrand, you have been with this board and the previous board long enough. You have seen us discuss at quite a great length how to spend $600,000. So $83 million is going to be interesting to see what the parameters are and how we can use that. So thank you for that. My colleagues, with me saying we all have spoken once, I am going to go right back down the line again one more time as you originally spoke. If you do not want to speak this time, just please say I'm good at this point. And I will start with, and these will be 2 minutes, and we will start with who we started with before, which was our first, Dr. Anderson.
Thank you, Ms. Kofax. That's such a very clean way of doing it instead of keeping a track of the lists. I just wanted to also ask a few questions that I didn't get the chance to earlier. Can you speak to Dr. Presidio, any supports that are reflected in the budget for middle school after-school programming, particularly at our schools, our Title I schools, where we do have a bit of an issue, and now with all the work that's been done regarding TJ, I'd like to have a sense of what is being allocated in that area, specifically targeting that focus.
So I'm going to defer back to Ms. Burden on that just to make sure that I'm correct, but I don't think there are any additional dollars beyond what we currently spend on middle school after school programs in the budget. I don't think there's any enhancements to those funds in this budget.
No, that's correct. You're right, Dr. Presidio. There's no additional funds for after-school programs.
I would ask that be a consideration, because if we're looking to, again, expand our pipeline as we are attempting to ready students into for application to TJ, we made a decision that's going to require that we have some investments in this area. So do I need to send that as a budget question, Ms. Burden?
Yes, please.
So budget question number 2. The next question that I have is, Mr. Smith, you talked a little bit regarding the expansion of the Zoom contract. Can you speak a little bit about that? I need a little bit more detail because I thought we were heading towards Schoology. I'm feeling a little bit confused here.
So yes, so my video is coming on here. So we are expanding Schoology. Schoology is our learning management system. Contract is the replacement for Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. So as you think about the learning management system, that's where our curriculum is housed, and that's how teachers and students will access the curriculum, and in the future access those probable and possible Zoom lessons using the virtual tool. And so as we implement Zoom, we will no longer be using Blackboard Collaborate Ultra as the tool for any type of virtual meetings, virtual discussions that we're having, and we'll actually be able to use Zoom to hold large division-wide meetings. We'll have licenses for up to 10,000 individuals to be part of web conferencing. So there is a clear difference. The Zoom will replace our capability to communicate, but Schoology will still remain the learning management system.
Okay, because we're still moving away from Blackboard and all of its functionalities, not just Blackboard Collaborate Ultra, correct?
Yes, we are moving away from Blackboard in totality.
Mr. Sethi, did you want to add something there?
I just want to take this moment and say I'm really excited to enable and help us move to that platform, but more critically, the board meetings we're hosting right now in Blackboard Ultra, and with all the challenges we're having, we are looking at how quickly can we accelerate and bring Zoom for our board meetings, which will allow us to obviously control, but also allow you and the board members to be able to connect and stay connected without having to do video on, off, and all the challenges we have recently with connections and speed and other things.
Thank you. Being able to see more than 4 faces at a time will be very helpful, particularly for our students in class. My next question is regarding the compensation. We talked about being super creative for compensation packages for teachers. Dr. Brabrand, will this be inclusive of other personnel, administrators? Please clarify that for me.
Well, first, I need to set expectations that this budget did not provide compensation. We got this money today at 8:30 in the morning, and we need to spend a lot of time and see what we can do. So I don't want to make promises I can't keep. I promise we'll work as hard as we've been working. Everything else that's been going on to go through this 83 million, the provisions, look at our own budget and see what we can do, what we can do around compensation, because we know it's a priority. We identified it last week that it was, you know, we will do that. So I believe that if we're doing compensation this year or for the FY22 budget, we need to be looking at everybody, because everybody has in their own way gone above and beyond in this pandemic. And we need to recognize that. But we'll work hard to bring our best thinking, but I do want to temper expectations until we've looked at it all about what we can offer and not offer to our employees. And it may require, frankly, knowing what the county can do, not only this year, but next year. If we have one-time money now, would we be able to have a way to have additional supports when that money runs out? So there's still a lot of questions to ask and to get answered, and it'll require continued collaboration, like Ms. Derenak Kofax said, with the budget chair, Ms. Marin, and her, and we will do that.
Thank you. And once again, you kind of got ahead of my thinking here, but I appreciate it. I think it's really essential to have, oops, may I just finish my statement? Oh, am I frozen?
Yes, yes, you're not frozen.
I didn't hear anything. I thought I was frozen. I think it's really important, Dr. Brabrand, for us to have some parity regarding that, because our teachers, yes, have worked hard, but so have our school administrators, our custodians, et cetera. I really think that we should not supersede the needs of one group over the other. So I could not stress that enough. And I can add that as a budget question as well. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Ms. Cohen next. Ms. Cohen, would you like to go back?
Yes, please.
Yes, and I just want to say, followed by Ms. McLaughlin. Thank you.
I think the first thing I'd say is that after the news of the vaccine, the second best news of 2021 has been Zoom. We're super, super excited. So thank you so much, Mr. Sadie, in all your work and getting us there. We're really looking forward to it. As a person who's now doing this on my phone because I got dropped out. So thank you. My question, I just want to make sure when Mr. Smith talked about stakeholders on those devices for our youngest groups, I wanted to just be sure that we have included our special ed community in the stakeholders. And I wondered if you minded just giving us a little bit better idea of who those stakeholders are.
What did you want me to do?
You can go ahead, Gotham. And yes, we do have our special ed stakeholders as part of the group, working very closely with ISD and DSS. I don't have the list in front of me, but we can certainly provide that list to the board of the stakeholders who are involved in this process. But Mr. Sethi could have more information to share.
Just to provide some structure of how we are approaching this, we managed to get our hands on a few of those devices. So we are using real tactile feedback in taking the devices into the schools, and we have made sets of those devices set up for staff to use. We were really hopeful students would be back in the building so they could actually play around and give us some feedback, but we are looking at some creative ways of getting that feedback. Our timeline is just a little impacted by this virus, and hopefully the vaccine and other news will help accelerate. But what we're doing is taking sets of devices, getting them to schools, and rotating them through as many of our schools as we can to volunteer in the next few weeks and get as much feedback as we can. We do have early childhood in that, obviously all the T-specs and the S-specs and the school communities involved. Hope that helps.
It does. Thank you very much. My other question is about those special ed dollars then. Sorry, that's my dog in the background. And just asking if Dr. Boyd didn't mind weighing in, since the special ed audit, it sounds like will not be done in time for this to, give us an idea of where those monies would most be helpful. I wondered if you might give us some of your initial thinking in where you see so far in your time some holes where those budget dollars could be super helpful.
Sure. Good evening. And thank you, Ms. Khan, for the question. Again, we are beginning our special education audit, and as you know, it's a 2-year process, and we're not certain if we will have any interim recommendations from AIR at this point. But should we not have those recommendations, I think Ms. Sizemore-Heiser pointed that out earlier in the discussion today. We have made some changes with respect to our restraint and seclusion policy, and we know that that's an area that we will know needs support in terms of social, emotional, and mental health support for our students as we look at additional ways to support them. And so that might be an area where we would need that additional support. We're also piloting UKIRU at Burke School. So again, that's something that I know a number of our stakeholder groups, ACSD, SEPTA, had advocated for, and we'll be implementing that this year. And so that's another resource that would require the use of some funds that aren't currently allocated at this time. And we're happy to outline and develop what that might look like, again, based on our data, based on the number of students and locations where students had more instances of seclusion. We do have that data, and we're happy to bring that forward should you request that.
That would be super helpful. And I think, just putting in a plug from seeing with our local screening committees, trying to get some extra support and know that we have, more kids who are struggling and needing the support and needing those meetings. And I just see our special ed staff that's just killing themselves trying to get everything scheduled with the pandemic and trying to do it just on Mondays and all of the various things. So definitely, if there's money in the budget to get more folks trained to be able to do some of the KETA or just pure bodies to help people kind of spread around the county when there's real needs at schools, that would be hugely important from the feedback that I'm getting. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you. Like my colleagues, I'm going to be racing the clock in 2 minutes, but I know we'll have more to discuss. First, I guess I would like to better understand, maybe from Dr. Brabrand and his team, when we talk about closing the learning gaps, and that being one of probably the 2 top priorities we've talked about for employee compensation and closing learning gaps, what is it that you'll bring us the plan? Because I really feel like we're all on the same page, but I could not possibly define to my constituents what operationally those actions and steps mean. And I think that's going to be critical, especially with a limited budget and our employees trying to understand how we're being mission critical in that focus. So is that to come later or now?
It'll come very soon. Again, we'll look to do it at the next budget. It'll be very detailed. This won't be just a broad bullet point. We'll get into the details, Ms. McLaughlin, that I know you'll want to see. Again, I just want to be sure when we bring it that we're bringing a high quality plan with the true equity lens. And Dr. Williams said that, she just had a chance this week to have her first briefing on it. I want to use the team that we're creating. We're creating a wonderful team here and really get their expertise before we just put something up because the budget came with new money and it's just pull out everything that we looked at doing 5 or 10 years ago. This pandemic is unique. The kids' learning challenges right now are unique given what we've endured, and we want to make sure we're tailoring the programs to this moment. So we'll have an update shortly.
And Dr. Brabrand, I just wanted to add that the revenue that we're receiving with the $83 million is additional revenue for the FY21 budget. So we'll have those discussions as part of the current budget because those dollars are not part of the FY22 budget.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Smith. The other thing that I want to just really emphasize, Dr. Brabrand, is you work hard on this about employee compensation. When I joined the board many years ago, I was struck by the fact that the county's government and the schools had a seesaw history of employee raises. It was not done consistently together each year. So a 10-year look back from former Chairman Bulova showed that there was some parity in the net result, but that we tried to get a new practice of really having that parity of any employee raises that are all based on our tax revenue in the county, a one Fairfax mindset. I would just really emphasize that to help our employees, to help our county employees, as was noted earlier, everyone has worked hard in the pandemic, from the county side, frontline workers to our own. So I encourage you and your team to keep doing what you do, but bring the data back to us. What is the county executive and the board of supervisors saying about a budget priority? And how might we get something for our employees, especially with the increased cost in healthcare for next year? We don't want people working for less in the next budget calendar. So that's, if you could just talk a little bit about that history and my concern there.
Sure. So you're right. The history has been sometimes a zigzag. The overall, and we calculated that, I think, for the joint board meeting last year, ended up being about the same. I'd like to stay away from zigzagging where one system is doing it and another isn't. And the county executive and I have talked about wanting to continue to work together and give compensation when we can. We both had frank in the fall, though, again, prior to this news, that the money just wasn't there, at least at this, back in November when we did our joint presentation, the revenue growth wasn't there. So we need to see where the county is on revenue growth. And I just want to, not to make things more complicated in a year that's school very complicated. We do believe that the new President Biden, is looking at a third ESSER that will focus on local aid and support for schools. I don't know what that will look like. I don't know what the rules of that will be, and we'll have to see what happens, which of course, those are unfolding day to day in front of us as part of our local news, and it's the national news. But if dollars, that will be something County Executive Hill and I will work carefully on coordinating that aid locally to work with our school system.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Thank you, Dr. Brabrand. Ms. Corbett Sanders. No go back necessary?
Oh, I do.
Okay, I thought so.
Quick, I'll make it quick. First, FCPS on, I see that we're going to reinstate fees for next year and extend those fees down into elementary school. Can someone give me an update on what that cost will be to our families? Because I am a bit concerned. Additionally, I see in this budget that we've cut maintenance significantly in our budget. And we've raised this concern for many years about maintenance. What is the current maintenance cycle now for long-term maintenance? Additionally, I see that the state cut summer school significantly in state funding. What are we doing? Should we add this to our legislative program to ask for the reinstatement of those funds as well? And then I see that we don't list any carryover funds for individual schools. Given that we've been closed most of this year, shouldn't we be able to claw back some of those carryover funds? Would like to know about that. And then additionally, this is really something where I would love for you to toot your own horn a bit. You had to have cut a number of things to be able to get us at this budget with the priorities of this board reflected in the budget, but you must have cut elsewhere. And so where were those big significant cuts? And shouldn't we have a place where we show that?
Well, thanks, Ms. Corbett Sanders. Let's see, Mr. Smith, could you take FCPS on and maintenance, and then I'll speak, or I'll ask Lee to speak to carryover, and I'll speak to summer funding.
Great, thank you. And then also the whole extent of our cuts, so that that's transparent as well.
List of cuts, okay.
So we can certainly get the FCPS on information as part of a budget question with the details around that. As it relates to major maintenance, we have about $6.4 million in the base budget for major maintenance, and we used about $3.6 million of one-time funds to round that out to $10 million every year. And so there may be an opportunity for us to look at the use of these one-time dollars to add to that possible one-time allotment that we add for major maintenance, and then look at ways to increase that in the future. So knowing that we can use some of these funds for infrastructure upgrades and major maintenance being a possibility for those infrastructure upgrades. So that may be one way for us to increase major maintenance in the next fiscal year, and then identify ways to increase that one-time funding or increase it in the base in the future.
Thank you. Along those lines, I'd love us to use some of those funds for increasing bandwidth in our buildings as well.
Thanks. Summer funding, I'll go back with Michael Malloy and see whether we need to do additional advocacy with summer funding. Sometimes they move money from one identified source and put it somewhere else. And then carryover funds, I want you to know, and you may remember Ms. Corbett-Sanders and the board, I did reduce carryover funds last year when the pandemic struck from 25% of carryover to 10%. I've not made a decision around carryover funds yet for this year, but I do think, as you correctly noted, that we'll have some carryover fund savings, and we need to be thinking strategically about how we can use that. And we'll work on getting, as a budget question, things that we have cut in this budget and put that in the budget questions.
I would love to have the numbers on 10% versus 25% on carryover funds as well, because as you know, we're looking for as many different places as possible to bring money to the table to ensure that we have the summer mitigation and we can do what we can with the. Okay. Did someone say something?
I did not. Absolutely. No. We'll do that. We'll be glad to do that.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett-Sanders. Ms. Tolan?
Yes, a couple of things. One thing I was wondering about is, as we move students into our schools, and we've already had the discussion about, even with the vaccine, will be required, at least initially, for social distancing. We have schools with capacity issues, et cetera. So I am very interested in how we can, be proactive and problem solve and work to get as many students, back into our buildings as possible, as soon as possible. And I know it's a combination of staffing and space. So I'd like to maybe hear from Mr. Plattenberg on possibilities around space enhancements that we could do both indoor and outdoor to try to get as many kids into school as possible.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan. And before Mr. Plattenberg responds, Dr. Ivy may have an update around, with Mr. Plattenberg, some of our capacity issues, which I think we have an update on that to share. Dr. Ivy?
Sure, I'm turning on my camera. Yes, we had a handful of schools, mainly high schools and one middle school, where the principals had expressed a concern about capacity. And so through an exercise of the region offices working with facilities, we actually walked the buildings side by side with the principals and staff, and we were able to identify additional spaces that could be used. And so as a result of that, the regents reported to me this morning, and I double checked with Mr. Plattenberg, that we do feel that we have the capacity issues resolved. Mr. Plattenberg, do you have anything you'd like to add? Can't hear you. We can't hear you.
His audio is not working. Jeff had some audio problems. Sorry, Dr. Ivy.
Okay, but that we were confirmed today, and so we'll continue to work and support the the staff as we continue to plan and problem solve if there are any additional challenges.
And I want to thank Dr. Ivy and the RAS and our principals. This is what I am talking about in this pandemic. People are stepping up and going above and beyond, and I could not be prouder. When we think we're stuck, we dig deeper and we find answers. And we are getting to yes every day with the leadership of this great leadership team. I'm so proud of them, and I just want to say that.
And that's what I was going to add to when my speaker went off, is exactly what Dr. Brabrand said. The principals have been phenomenal in working through. When we first went through it, we had a number of schools, considerable schools with seasoned principals that were having challenges, and their efforts were just simply amazing. But when you take a look at some of the options, and I know, Ms. Tolan, you're really key on outdoor learning. We have 119 schools with outdoor learning centers and wildlife habitats as well. 89 of our schools have edible gardens. We have 5 of those pilot tents that we purchased, and we're looking to expand that. I know we have another order for more. So when we look at not only one of the key interests of the sustainability initiative, but creative ways of using space, and also some of our outdoor learning space, as the weather changes from winter to spring, we certainly have looked at those as providing other alternatives and other options. And I think that was part of your question as well.
Right, exactly. I appreciate the creativity and the problem solving. We need lots of that.
Yeah.
Along those lines, I know, our families have just struggled with their scheduling and childcare and, kids in school, kids not, the schedule back and forth. So I'm wondering if we can really start looking at, thinking about what kinds of things we can do to help our families as we move, to put kids back in school, especially if we're looking at a 2-day-a-week schedule. How can we help our families? Even I've been talking with Mr. Smith a little bit about, something as simple as, we have families that are taking advantage of the SRS program. And I'm very thankful to the county for increasing that program to 10 more schools. But it's not in every school. So we've got families that, have kids in, their base school, and they're taking advantage of SRS at another school, but they're working families. So they're going to drop their kids off in the morning at one school, but then they don't know how to get their kids to their base school. Can we help them with transportation, or, can we look at some really creative ways to, help our families? And I'm not sure who that question is for, but I'll put it on the list of things to maybe look at.
Sure. Mr. Smith, did you want to take a stab at that one? Now we have action group to support.
No, and I was just going to add that we're looking at that. Ms. Tolan and I have been going back and forth via email, and this is one of her last emails, and so I've asked the team to take a look at that.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, I have Ms. Sizemore Heiser.
Thank you. And I apologize if I ask a question that's been asked. I was kicked off twice, so I didn't hear all of the commentary. So, Dr., I wanted to follow up on Ms. Cohen's questioning around special education needs. I have concerns regarding remediation needs, regression, IEP goals, and I said from the beginning with our special ed audit that I'm very supportive of the audit, but I have concerns about waiting on budget needs, especially considering this year. So I love, and we can do this offline, but if you have any initial thoughts on, outside of just restraint and seclusion support, what kind of supports do you think our special ed students need, our staff needs, even in terms of greater needs of identification next year and local screening if the additional students come back to school with needs? So if you have any comments on that, I'd love to hear it in terms of this budget or going forward.
Dr. Boyd, you want to make any comments?
Yes, sorry, I was trying to activate my video and audio, clicking the buttons. So thank you, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. We are in the process of conducting IEP meetings to address recovery services that really talks about the assessing learning loss, specifically as it relates to our students with disabilities in a very individualized manner. We are going to need to collect that data because we do anticipate that we may be providing those services over, far beyond this school year, just depending upon what services IEP teams deem appropriate for each student. So we'll need to collect that information, and certainly we'll need to have staff that can provide those services outside of the structured regular school day. And again, and certainly we can follow up additionally more offline, but this would be recovery services or something that is separate and apart from our school year services, separate and apart from ESY or extended school year services. So this is another financial impact that we really weren't able to use historical data because this is something that's specific for COVID, as the impact of COVID and schools being closed. But we are beginning to compile that data, and we'll have additional information forthcoming as to what, if any, budget implications that will certainly have in the provision of future services.
Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I was muted. I was trying to be like Carl. So I just wanted, Dr. Brabrand, I know we're just starting to look at this, but I've mentioned before my concern for high school students who will be at risk of not graduating, not just this year, but any current high school student long-term. Have we looked at budgetary impacts either for these one-time funds to September 2023, but longer term on what we may need for those students in particular?
We're starting the, excuse me, we're starting those discussions. We haven't finished them. And Dr. Presidio might have had more to add. He had to step off for a family situation. Follow back up. We do need to start looking beyond just next year. And one of the things that I think we need to continue to think about as we do strategic planning, and we are, and this board is in fact leading the way to do even more of it. We've got to get out of thinking about a budget in terms of just a one-year budget. We are thinking a multi-year perspective. The CIP is done over 5 years. We have an operating budget done over 1 year. And COVID, I think, is really upending this notion of a year-to-year budgeting. We're going to need to continue to think differently, and we will bring some of the ideas about what we need to be doing in the out years so the board can start to be thinking about how you want to advocate for your priorities now, but knowing what's coming. And remember, one of the other things coming, we believe, will be the additional standards of quality prescribed by the Board of Education that haven't hit yet. School nurses, school psychologists, social workers, all the things, all that can help special education students and gen education kids. But there will be a significant local share to that, and we've got to start adding those dollars up as well. So you're right on the money, and we'll work on bringing a more updated strategic look at one of the next budget meetings.
And as if I may put a plug in as well, one thing I'd love to, and I don't know if this is a budget question, but I think it's kind of broader than that. Some thoughts as your team pulls together on lessons learned of positive things we can take forward and embed in our education plan that may have budgetary impacts. So Zoom is an example of these larger cross, system meetings, but I'm thinking of our focus on social emotional learning that's been embedded in our advisory periods on a very regular basis in our schools. And are there lessons learned with budgetary impacts that we think can make our school system better? I would love to hear more thoughts around that as we're going forward and in this budget process as well as the following year. And go ahead, sorry, Dr. Beard.
I'd love that. And if you can put it as a budget question, I'd ask for your consideration to frame that as a budget question so we dig deeper.
Of course. And then that's on that side note, what I'd love to also look at, again, long-term is digital literacy. I may finish my thought, Ms. Darnat Koufax. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Digital literacy lessons and the digital literacy gap. We often talk about digital literacy, or digital access, but we don't talk about the digital literacy gap. And I think COVID has laid that bare. So what we may need to help embed more consistent digital literacy and even assessment of that and closing those gaps. And I can put that as a budget question also. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I've had a few board members text me that they do not need a go back. Mr. Frisch, would you like a go back?
I meant to text you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. With that, everybody has had their chance to do a second round. If anybody is, since we do have a little time, I will entertain the option of 1 minute third go rounds. And after that, I think we will call it a night, as we have budgeted time until 7 p.m. But I see there are 2 people who would like to do that. One thing I want to do, I have another meeting at 6:45, so I just want to say, if we're not done by then, Ms. Marin will take over this, but I wanted to remind you all that we have public hearings scheduled for January 26th and 27th. And as I said to Dr. Brabrand, the next work session is for the 27th. Melanie and I will send out reminders to you about what to expect at that meeting, but I will now go for 1 minute final go backs for Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Anderson, and Ms. Tolan. Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you. So in my minute, I would just say, Dr. Brabrand, as you know, I've been a big champion for us staffing our division counsel's office to cut down on outside counsel fees. It's absolutely better return on investment to have in-house staff. But I do think with, I believe it's a $500,000 line item that we've identified earmarked for that. It would be helpful at a future work session, or if Ms. Burden, you'd prefer, I just put it as a budget question so we don't take up work session time. But I do think we're going to want to have the details of understanding, to something stated earlier by one of my colleagues, as you add staff to reduce outside counsel fees, how will the FY22 budget reflect it? You know, ideally you'd want it to be cost neutral,
Right.
rather than the additional $500,000. So I think that's going to be important. And
we'll do that. And could you do it through a budget question so that we go ahead and put the analysis, and then if there's additional discussion needed, we can have both the budget question and the discussion at a future meeting. We would support. Yeah. Glad to have it.
Okay. Process question, Ms. Koufax. I do appreciate that we're scheduled to go till 7. I also recognize that some board members may not have questions right now, but I do wish we would take advantage of going until 7 as long as board members have questions, because we always end up running out of time. So if we had the time scheduled, I wish we would still continue to finish up until 7, not if 3 of us are done and that's it, because I had certainly more than 1 minute to ask some questions.
Okay, let's get through this next round, and then I can take a pulse of the board. That's fine. It wasn't our intent to go beyond that, but that's fine. You're right. It's okay to continue to ask questions.
Anytime we get back, staff will be busy answering your budget questions. I can assure you, Ms. McLaughlin.
We do know that, Dr. Brady. Ms. Anderson, Dr. Anderson.
Thank you. Just a quick question for Mr. Plattenberg. As we're talking about these new funds that have just come in with infrastructure and PPE being part of it, I would like 2 things. One, we continue, even as late as today, get requests, or rather concerns, that PPE is in short supply. I would like for this to be, again, cemented for the public that we do not have a lack of PPE. And if we do, to also bring that up. 2, if Jeff could speak to any ventilation concerns that we should be paying attention to as we're thinking about how to use these new funding that's been provided, so that when students go back to school, because they are not going to be part of the inoculated group, so that there could be some greater comfort in around being back in the building. So if we could start there.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Anderson. And Dr. Brabrand had asked for Brabrand briefs to be prepared, and I'm in the final stages of providing those drafts to give the board updates, not only on the HVAC process with the MERV 13 filters and the installation. As I've reported before, we've had some issues with supplies and supply chain based upon what's been done, but we have workarounds for all of that. So you're correct. And what Mr. Smith had mentioned before about some of that additional funding, that 3.6 million he was talking about, additional funding, the full intent of that was to go ahead and put that into exactly what you speak about, some of our HVAC upgrades. So I've asked staff to go ahead and identify where we might, if we were fortunate enough to receive some of that additional funding, so that we can be pre-planned and prepared to go. We definitely, when you look at our maintenance backlog exceeding the useful life of over 200 million, any inroads we can make in that direction are certainly moving in the positive way. And so Mr. Smith has already asked me about that. Dr. Brabrand has asked for the Brabrand brief that I've drafted, and it's in the final stages. So very good questions, and we'll be providing full responses on each of those. But thank you. Yeah, I would definitely like to have additional funding for HVAC.
Should I put this in as a budget question, or will that just be reflected in the budget?
Well, I always like budget questions because it codifies everything. And I'll be providing, exactly a little more detail of what I'm saying and specifically what we might use the funding for should we get additional funding.
I will do that. And also the PPE?
Yeah, the PPE, Mr. Smith has said before, and I know that comes under Ms. Burden and Michelle Pratt, but the statement of that has been that we do have ample PPE. In fact, some of the issues we had were trying to find storage of some of the quantities that we had provided outside of the warehouse. So we were looking at other schools where we could store hand sanitizer, for example, because they came in pallet loads, and our warehouse is so many square footage, and that has to be stored in conditioned climate space. So I know we do have ample PPE. There is a guide, the safety guideline, the student safety guideline that DSS, Dr. Boyd and her team, working with our folks and the purchasing folks, put together and codified exactly what PPE is available and what the division has provided, in addition to what the health department had recommended. So there's a listing of exactly what the items are that are available. And I know that working through the warehouse, there are ample items that are available. And if anybody has any questions, to work through their principal and the principal working, notifying Mr. Smith, myself, Ms. Burden, we'll be able to address any concerns that people have.
Thank you. And my last,
just one second, Dr. Anderson. Dr. Ivy has her hand up.
Sure, just turning my camera back on. I was just going to ask and add, I totally support what Mr. Plattenberg said as far as working with the principal, but if you have direct concerns and locations of where those concerns are coming from, you can just please let me know, and I can follow up with the region and the principals. And we are doing that as well when the teacher associations bring concerns regarding PPE for us, because there's plenty to go around. And if there are concerns and we need to resolve them, we definitely have work to do so. But just let us know.
no, thank you very much for that. That is very helpful, because I thought there was plenty to go around. My last question is maybe just a statement or a budget question, is the elementary principal salary scale adjustment that we took off the list last year, painfully so, because we just didn't have the opportunity to do so. I know Ms. McLaughlin will speak about how long this has been in the making, public standards. I would like for that to be reintroduced into the discussion as well. So if it's a budget question, please direct me, or if it's feedback now, also give me that feedback. Thank you.
I think a budget question would help as well, just so that the public and everybody can see, because this was something we put on the unfunded list. It has been many years, so a budget question would be great, and we can certainly have continued dialogue about that as we finish budget development in the next several months.
Done. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to interject here just 1 second. If Ms. Burden, can can you just explain, will you be copying the entire board? I forget the actual process as for the budget questions. So since several of us are probably going to submit similar questions, what is the process once it is asked? Do you copy the entire board?
Yeah, usually once we get, you know, if we get a grouping of budget questions, we post those and send an email out letting the board members know that they're posted. And at the same time, that email goes to all of the LT members so that they know that they have questions that they need to be attending to. So we just kind of use one email for both purposes to let the board know that, yes, we got your question. Yes, it's in the queue, and to let LT members know what they're supposed to be working on.
And you'll let the whole board know that.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Okay. That's what I wanted clarity on. Thank you so much. Ms. Tolan.
Yes, just a couple of questions that I'll be putting in. One is, given the uncertainty that we have, of course, around our membership numbers this year, and feeding into our overall capacity concerns that we have in general, I'm wondering if, you know, some short-term assistance for our planning office may be in order for them to, you know, help with, you know, redoing capacity numbers over the next year and a half or so. So that would be one question I'll put forward. I also am wondering if we can really look at the different, we have so many different kinds of contracts, different day lengths, you know, different salary scales. If we can really look at, you know, our SBIS, our T-specs, and other, you know, instructional personnel, and, you know, doing professional development, working the 5th quarter, you know, whatever it is, how can we really maximize, you know, make sure those people are treated most fairly, and, you know, maximize economically how we are structuring those contracts? Maybe something worth taking a look at. And then I just wanted to make a quick mention that we submitted JEF goals, and we'll be looking at those later this spring as well. And that doesn't show up in the budget anywhere. So just mentioning that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Koufax, Ms. Marin.
Thank you. Ms. Pekarsky.
Thank you. Just a quick question, Dr. Brabrand. Have there, you know, with the healthcare costs, you know, increasing so dramatically, have there been have there been conversations with the county about maybe, you know, partnering with them on healthcare as a way to try to minimize some of those costs on the system?
Yeah, we have looked at the healthcare plans, and there really are some differences just based on the composition of employees, because they have such a heavy public safety piece that their risk pool is a little different. We could have Sean or Dee Holly Brown come and speak to that. So we have looked at it to see whether it would be a better deal for us. And we haven't found yet that there would be a great synergy at this point. I do want to share the costs, as you see, are about 5% clip. We're not growing greater than the national trends. We are doing a good job. The problem is healthcare continues to rise. I'd love for you all to know, just as a nugget, Michael Malloy could give you more information, but the rise in Medicaid spending at the state level is well over double the revenue growth rate for general fund revenues. It's crowding out money that ultimately years ago would have probably been directed towards schools. So when you start to look at revenue growth, and I could work to get you some slides, the state revenue growth, the Medicaid is leading the pack. So there's additional revenues coming into the state, but it's getting diverted to other things besides just K-12 education. And that remains one of our real challenges. It's one of the real challenges for the General Assembly too. So we'll keep working on it, and thanks for that question.
Thank you. See, you've already thought about it. Okay, thank you, Dr. Brewer.
thank you so much. I see I have Miss Marin next.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, Ms. McCarthy, I just wanted to mention that when we had our joint budget committee meeting with the Board of Supervisors in December, I believe it was, or maybe November, I did ask that exact question to Chairman Jeff McKay, and he said that it has taken a lot of work over several years to and on the healthcare costs and try to get everyone to, a comparable place over different, facets of different groups of employees. So that is there for consideration, but I also agree with what the superintendent said that, again, where our state legislators need to help us advocate for better solutions at the local level. So hope.
Thank you, Miss Marin. And with that, the only person I see as one final go back is Miss McLaughlin.
Hi, Dr. Braybrand. I know you.
Miss McLaughlin, I'm going to get 19 minutes back.
There you go.
How exciting is that?
That's right. So not for necessarily today, but I would like for you and your team to bring back to us, what are the other Northern Virginia school districts doing about the state's proposal on matching funds? So I know because we're the largest school system in Virginia, matching funds for teacher raises, it turns out to be a $31 million, $31 million increase in revenue needs, if I understood today's presentation. So the question just becomes, as we wrestle with this decision as a division, it would be helpful to know, since we are trying to remain competitive in the region with our school districts. Is that something you all thought about or have a pulse on yet?
Yes, and we are hearing that both Prince William and Loudoun are looking at doing steps for their employees. So it is concerning. Remember though, board members, Prince William gets double the money that Fairfax County Public Schools does. So when you get double the money in general, that's a big piece of the part. The Loudoun story is a little more complicated, but I will share some of my initial conversation is that the data centers have provided an extreme revenue pool, but we'll continue to bring you updates and have that as a next step for the next meeting.
Yeah, I think as we talked about a lot this evening, so much of helping our employees understand your commitment and the board's commitment to competitive pay whenever and however we can. They have to know the data. They have to know through the data the various restrictions we face, things like the LCI, how that impacts what monies we get versus Prince William, and what our revenue coming so much from the county, what the county does to ensure raises for its employees has to be a factor for how we try to ensure one Fairfax for everybody.
Yes.
Okay, that's now you know why I wanted my third go back.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. We appreciate it. And I see no other hands raised, so you will get a little time back, Dr. Braybrand. My colleagues, thank you for your hard work in looking over this budget at in such a short time with lots going on, as we always do. Again, important dates to remember will be January 26th and 27th, the public hearings. And I do want to say that typically we have not had to add a third night. The second night is, well, we typically haven't even had to add a second night. So right now we have those 2 dates scheduled, and in recent years we have often not needed the second night, but we will keep you apprised of that. Our adoption of superintendent's advertised budget will be on the 18th, and the Fairfax County Executive presents his advertised budget to the Board of Supervisors on February 23rd. As I said, Dr. Braybrand and your team, Ms. Burden, Ms. Wigington, thank you so much, Mr. Smith, for all of your help getting us to where we are today at a budget that is thoughtful at this point in time, even it's not exactly where everybody needs it to be, but we look forward to hearing from you and working with you on how the new monies that you've talked about earlier today can be used and allocated, and talking together as a group. I would look forward to seeing your budget questions. So with that, I believe I can adjourn our first budget work session. Thank you all for your time this evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, Kyle. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks, everyone.